For 3 years, he ignored her completely. Then she started coming home at midnight, and suddenly she was all he could think about. This is that story. The penthouse was dark, but Bianca wasn't ready to go up yet. Midnight in the city, and everything below the 42nd floor had gone soft and amber, streetlights smearing gold across wet asphalt, the distant percussion of a garbage truck making its rounds like it had somewhere important to be. The elevator in the private underground garage of the Cavallo building sat open, waiting. She didn't get in. Instead, Bianca Cavallo sat on the low concrete ledge beside her car with her heels placed neatly beside her, her feet bare against the cold floor, and an open container of tiramisu balanced on her knee. The plastic fork was the kind you got from a corner cafe, flimsy, the tines slightly uneven, and she did not care even a little. She ate slowly, deliberately, the way you only eat when no one is watching and you are not performing appetite for anyone. Her phone was propped against the tiramisu lid. She was watching a video of a street cat in Naples stealing an entire bread roll from a bakery display and sprinting away with the whole thing in its mouth. And every time the cat made the turn at the corner, its little legs working furiously, the bread enormous and absurd, Bianca laughed. Not a polished laugh. Not the composed, barely there smile she had perfected for Cavallo dinners and her husband's associates. A real one. Shoulders up, eyes crinkled, slightly breathless, the kind that left a sound in the air. She was sitting in a parking garage at midnight with her shoes off and tiramisu on her knee, and she was laughing. Her penthouse was 42 floors directly above her head. She had left before 8 that evening and had not once checked whether anyone upstairs had noticed. Her phone showed no missed calls from the penthouse landline. No texts. Not a word from the man who had sworn before God and an audience of 300 people to cherish her. She looked at the elevator, looked back at her phone, and took another bite of tiramisu. She was in absolutely no hurry. That one detail, that one small, quiet, barefoot detail, says more about this marriage than any argument ever could. But to understand how Bianca Russo ended up sitting in a parking garage at midnight with her shoes off, eating tiramisu alone, and finding it genuinely peaceful, you have to go back 3 years, 2 months, and a number of days she stopped counting somewhere around month 14. Back before she was Bianca Cavallo. Back when she was just Bianca, quick-witted, dark-eyed, the kind of woman who sent handwritten thank you notes and remembered the names of your siblings after hearing them once. She had grown up in the Prati neighborhood of Rome, in a third-floor apartment above a dry cleaner, raised by her grandmother, Nonna Sara, a small woman who stood under 5 feet and moved through the world like someone who had already won every argument she planned to have. Nonna Sara kept fresh flowers on the table even in the lean months, communicated primarily through the pressure of her hands and the temperature of her silences, and had one foundational belief she had pressed into Bianca from childhood like a seal into warm wax: a woman who knows her own worth does not haggle over it. Bianca had believed that. Once. Her best friend was Precious Adeyemi, Nigerian-Italian, loud in 3 languages, and the only person on earth who could say something absolutely outrageous and have it land as wisdom by the end of the sentence. They had met at university in Milan, in a seminar on contract law where Precious had raised her hand and delivered an argument so confidently incorrect that the professor had stood in silence for a full 11 seconds before responding. Bianca had caught her eye from across the room, and they had both, at the exact same moment, turned their faces toward their desks and shook with suppressed laughter. That was Precious. Boundless, specific, and somehow always, eventually, on the right side of things, even when she arrived there through a route no map would ever show. They were at a private art exhibition in the Brera district, white walls, red wine, the kind of event where people looked at paintings with expressions of deep feeling they had prepared in advance. When Bianca turned from a canvas she wasn't really seeing and saw him across the room. He was standing near the far window alone. Italian suit, dark navy, the cut so precise it seemed structural rather than decorative. He wasn't circulating, wasn't performing interest in the art, wasn't doing any of the things people at these events felt obligated to do. He held a glass of something dark and he was simply still, looking out at the city through the glass with the expression of a man whose thoughts were somewhere below them in the streets, in the machinery of things, and who was not entirely sure he wanted to come back up. There was a coiled tension to him, even at rest. Like a room with something very heavy locked inside it. Bianca looked away, then looked back. Precious appeared at her elbow with 2 fresh glasses of wine. She followed Bianca's sight line with the precision of a woman who had done this many times. Took one beat to assess. "Absolutely not," Precious said, and handed her the wine. Bianca took it. "I didn't say anything. You said everything." Precious sipped. "That man has a biography. You can see it from here. It has footnotes, Bia. It has an index." Bianca watched him set his glass down with a kind of quiet finality, like a period at the end of a sentence only he had heard. "I know," she said. She went to talk to him anyway. His name was Dante Cavallo. And for one season, impossibly brief and total as a fever, he had looked at her like she was the only still point in a world that never stopped moving. She had believed it was the beginning of something. It was, in fact, the last time he would ever really see her until the night she stopped waiting for it to matter, put on a purple dress, and came home at midnight from a life she had built entirely without him. That night begins now. He heard the elevator before he saw her. That soft mechanical exhale, the cables settling, the doors parting, was a sound Dante Cavallo had stopped registering somewhere in the 2nd year of their marriage. It had become part of the penthouse's ambient noise, like the refrigerator's low hum or the city breathing 42 floors below. His wife came home. His wife went to sleep. The world continued its rotation without requiring anything from him. Tonight, he heard it. He was standing at the bar cart near the window, his 2nd whiskey of the night barely touched, when something shifted in him the way pressure shifts before a storm, not a sound, not a thought, just a change in the quality of the air. He didn't turn around. He was Dante Cavallo. He didn't flinch at sounds in his own home. But his hand, the one wrapped around the glass, went very still. The elevator opened. And then she was in the room. He turned, because something in his chest demanded it, and the first thing he registered was the color. Purple. Not the muted, careful shades Bianca had always worn to his events, those deliberate non-colors she chose like a woman trying not to take up too much space in a painting that wasn't hers. This was different. This purple was bold and unapologetic, the color of a bruise, of wine spilled on white marble, of something permanent. The dress ended above her knee, and she wore it the way women wear things when they have stopped dressing for rooms and started dressing for themselves. She smelled of rain and cold air and something else underneath, perfume he didn't recognize. He didn't recognize the perfume. In 3 years of marriage, Dante had bought Bianca 7 bottles of the same scent, a light, white floral thing that his mother had once said suited her. She had always worn it. He realized now, standing in his own living room with his drink in his hand and his jaw tight, that he had chosen it because it was easy, because it was inoffensive, because it asked nothing of the room it entered. What she was wearing now asked everything. She set her bag on the entry table, small, black, unfamiliar, and moved into the penthouse the way she used to move through rooms before she had learned, somewhere in the architecture of their marriage, to make herself quieter. There was no performance to it. No look thrown in his direction to measure his reaction, no careful arrangement of her face into something neutral and placeable. She simply walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood in its cold light for a moment, considering. Dante watched her. He could not have told you when he had last really watched her. Not looked past her, not registered her presence the way you register furniture, familiar, functional, unremarkable, but actually watched. Her hair was down. It fell past her shoulders in a way that looked wind-caught, like she had been somewhere with open air and hadn't thought to fix it before coming home. Her feet, he noticed, were bare. She must have taken her heels off in the elevator. She did that sometimes, he remembered suddenly, from early in their marriage. She hated wearing heels indoors, had some quiet conviction about floors and bare feet that he had found charming once and then forgotten entirely. He had forgotten it entirely. "You're home late," he said. His voice came out controlled. It always did. 20 years of learning to keep his voice controlled in rooms where showing your hand cost you everything had made it involuntary, by now a reflex as automatic as breathing. But the words were wrong and he knew it even as he said them. He had not waited up out of concern. He had not been sitting in the dark for the past hour with one eye on the elevator because he was worried about her safety. He had been sitting in the dark because the apartment had felt, for the first time in 3 years, wrong without her in it. Bianca took a bottle of water from the refrigerator and closed it. Then she looked at him. Not the way she used to look at him, careful, reading the room, calculating the temperature of his mood before deciding how to arrange her own. She looked at him the way you look at something you've already made a decision about. "It's midnight," she said. "I'm not late. I was out." "Out where?" "The city." A small pause. "With Precious." He should have left it there. He knew he should have left it there. Dante Cavallo did not ask his wife to account for her evenings. He had, in fact, spent the better part of 3 years demonstrating through consistent and total indifference that her evenings were entirely her own concern. He had no standing to demand an accounting now. He knew all of this. "You should have said something," he said. She looked at him for a moment that stretched like taffy, thin and long and slightly uncomfortable. Then something moved at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile and not quite its opposite. "Good night, Dante," she said. And she walked past him toward the bedroom with her water bottle in her hand and her heels abandoned somewhere behind her and her purple dress moving around her like it was entirely at ease in the world, and she did not look back. Not once. Not even to check whether the words had landed. He stood at the bar cart for a long time after her bedroom door clicked shut. The whiskey in his glass had gone warm. Outside, the city continued its slow, indifferent glow, all those lit windows, all those lives running their separate currents far below him. He had built an empire in this city. He had made men twice his age lower their eyes in his presence. He controlled supply chains and silence and the spaces between words where real power lived. His name alone was enough to alter the behavior of rooms. His wife had just walked past him like he was furniture. He set the glass down. His hand, the one with the ink crawling up past his wrist, the marks that mapped a life he had chosen with full knowledge of what it cost, was curled against the bar top. Not quite a fist. Something just short of one. He looked at it like it belonged to someone else. He had not felt jealous in years. He had not felt much of anything in years, if he was being truthful with himself, which he rarely was. Dante Cavallo kept his interior life on a very short leash, and he had not seen the point of examining what was at the end of it. But something had walked through his door tonight in a purple dress that smelled of freedom he hadn't given her permission to find. And something in his chest, locked and heavy and long untouched, had felt, for one terrible second, like it wanted to open. He did not sleep. He sat in the dark living room until the city below him went from midnight black to the pale, reluctant gray of early morning, and he thought about a woman he had married and stopped seeing, who had apparently decided, without consulting him at all, to become someone entirely new. He thought about the perfume he didn't recognize. He thought about the way she hadn't looked back. It did not happen all at once. That was the thing no one told you about being slowly disappeared by someone, that it came in increments so small you kept finding reasons to call them something else. In the first year, she called it his world. Dante's world was enormous and consuming and ran on a kind of pressure she could feel even when he never spoke of the specifics. He came home late. He left early. His phone rang at hours that had no business being awake, and he would step out of whatever room she was in and close the door behind him with a quiet, final click that she had learned not to take personally. She had married a man who ran things. Running things cost time. She understood this. She was patient because she loved him and because Nana Sarah had raised her to understand that love was not a feeling you waited on but a decision you kept making, daily, in the small and unglamorous ways. She made those decisions. She learned the names of his associates and greeted them warmly at dinners she planned and executed without being asked. She built a home inside the penthouse, real flowers on the table, not arrangements from a service, books in the places where a decorator would have put objects, a kitchen that smelled of something actual by Sunday evenings. She made it a place worth coming home to. She told herself he noticed, even when he gave no particular sign of noticing. In the second year, she called it distance. This required more effort to sustain as a category. Distance implied a gap that could, in principle, be crossed. Distance was geographical, situational, temporary. What Dante had developed was something more architectural, a quality of not being present even when he was physically in the same room, seated across a dinner table she had set with candles, eating food she had cooked, looking through her at something only he could see. She had tried, in the second year, to reach him. She tried conversation, real conversation, not the logistical exchange of information that their evenings had contracted into. She asked him questions. She told him things about herself she had been saving, the way you save good things for the right moment, not understanding that if you wait too long for the right moment it simply becomes a habit of waiting. He answered when she asked, and occasionally, he said something that sounded like the man she had married, something dry and precise and lit from the inside with an intelligence he kept mostly hidden, and on those nights, she went to bed thinking that the distance was thawing. It wasn't thawing. It was just having an inconsistent day. By the third year, she had run out of names for it. She stopped trying to name it around the time she realized she had started editing herself in real time, measuring how much space she was taking up in a conversation, lowering the volume of her own enthusiasm, filing down the edges of her opinions before she offered them. She noticed it one evening when Precious called and Bianca, standing in the kitchen while Dante sat 20 feet away in his study with the door open, spoke in a voice that was not quite her voice. Smaller. More careful. As though she were a guest in a house where the rules hadn't been posted, but the consequences for breaking them were quietly understood. She hung up the phone and stood in her kitchen, with her flowers on her table, and heard herself think, when did I get so quiet? She did not cry. She considered it, stood there with her hand flat on the cool of the counter, and decided against it. Not because she was suppressing anything, but because something in her had, in that moment, very calmly and without drama, finished. It was a Tuesday in November. She remembered it precisely because she had made lamb that evening, a recipe from Nana Sarah that took 4 hours and required a particular patience with the heat. And Dante had eaten it without comment and taken his phone to the study before she had cleared the plates. She had stood at the sink washing dishes, and she had looked out the window at the cities spread below her like a circuit board, all those lit windows, all those people in their lit rooms living their actual lives, and she had thought, with a clarity that felt almost gentle, I have been waiting for a man to come back who is not coming back. And I have been disappearing in the waiting. She finished the dishes. She dried her hands on the kitchen towel, the good linen one with the blue stripe that she had brought from Rome in her luggage, because it reminded her of Nana Sarah's kitchen, and she made herself a promise so quiet it barely registered as a thought. Not anymore. She did not confront him. There was no confrontation, no night of raised voices and overturned expectations, no dramatic reckoning. Those things, she understood now, were for women who still needed something from the person in front of them. She no longer needed Dante Cavallo to see her. She needed to go find the parts of herself she had put in storage and see if they had survived the cold. She called Precious the next morning. Told her she had some time, finally, actually, truly. Precious, who had been watching this marriage the way you watch a slow leak in a ceiling, with mounting concern and the grim knowledge that eventually the whole thing comes down, asked no questions. Simply said, good and started making plans. What followed was quiet and gradual and entirely her own. A small investment, routed through channels that had nothing to do with the Cavallo name, into a business Precious had been building in the white and legal economy, a logistics consultancy, clean and careful and genuinely good at what it did. Mornings she began spending differently, at a studio near the Navigli Canal where a woman named Julia taught a movement class that was not about burning anything off, but about remembering you had a body that belonged to you. Books she had been meaning to read for years and kept not reading because the evenings had always felt like they were waiting for something else. And slowly, in the way that things that have been compressed for a long time will, when given the smallest release of pressure, begin to re-expand slowly, Bianca came back to herself. Dante did not notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign. She was still there every morning. She still moved through the penthouse, still sat across from him at the dinners that now happened less frequently, still existed inside the perimeter of his life, in every way that mattered to the outside world. She was Bianca Cavallo. She attended what she was required to attend. She was polished and composed and gave nothing away. But she had stopped waiting. And a woman who has stopped waiting for you is a fundamentally different creature than one who hasn't, even if you cannot yet see the difference. Even if it takes you 3 more months to register the purple dress and the unfamiliar perfume and the particular quality of a woman who walks past you without looking back. Even then, you're very, very late. The Castellano anniversary dinner was the kind of event that wasn't optional. In the architecture of the city's underworld, it functioned less as a celebration and more as a census, every family of consequence showing up to be counted, to be seen in the right configurations. To demonstrate through proximity and posture that the alliances printed on no document but understood by everyone remained intact. You did not skip the Castellano dinner. You arrived on time, you wore something appropriate, and you performed the specific kind of warmth that had nothing to do with warmth. Bianca had been attending it for 3 years. For 3 years she had worn black or ivory or the particular shade of deep navy that photographed well and communicated nothing. Dante's wife. Present, composed, a decorative confirmation of his domestic stability. She had learned the grammar of these events in the first year, who was greeted with both cheeks, who received only one, who required a moment of deference in the conversation before you could speak freely, who was to be smiled at but never drawn into anything that could be reported back. She was good at it. Better, she suspected, than anyone around her credited, because being underestimated by rooms full of dangerous men had turned out to be a remarkably useful condition. This year, she wore purple. She had found the dress 3 weeks earlier, on an afternoon when Precious had pulled her into a boutique on Baia della Spiga with the energy of someone executing a plan she had been refining for some time. It was structured at the shoulders and simple in its line, ending above the knee, the color so saturated and unapologetic that Bianca had looked at it on the hanger and felt something shift in her sternum. That one, Precious had said, not even framing it as a suggestion. Bianca had bought it and then hung it in the back of her wardrobe and looked at it for 3 weeks the way you look at a decision you've already made but haven't yet committed to out loud. On the evening of the dinner she put it on, stood in front of the mirror for exactly long enough to confirm that she looked like herself, her actual self, not the managed, dimmed, careful version, and went downstairs. Dante was waiting in the entry hall in his dark suit, checking something on his phone. He looked up when she appeared. Something moved through his expression fast, almost involuntary, the way a man's face will react before he has time to arrange it, and then it was gone, replaced by the controlled neutrality he wore as a matter of professional habit. He said nothing about the dress. She had not expected him to. She picked up her clutch and walked past him to the car. The Castellano estate was 40 minutes from the city, a property that communicated its own power through restraint, long driveway, low lighting, the kind of landscaping that required an army of maintenance, but appeared effortless. Inside, it was warm and crowded with the specific energy of people being very careful with one another. Glasses of good wine. Flowers that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. Conversations that were several conversations at once, each operating on a different frequency. She felt the room register her before she had fully entered it. Not loudly. There were no gasps, no dramatic pauses. But she had been coming to these events for 3 years in her careful colors, and the purple was a statement delivered in a language every person in that room was fluent in. Carmela Riva, the most architecturally composed woman Bianca had ever encountered, caught her eye from across the room and held it for a beat longer than social necessity required, then lifted her glass a fraction of an inch. It was the smallest possible gesture. It was also, from Carmela Riva, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Dante moved toward the men he needed to speak with: Sal Ferri, the Castellano brothers, a man from Genoa whose name she had never been given, and Bianca moved in her own direction entirely. She found a position near the garden windows, accepted a glass of wine from a passing tray, and let the evening come to her rather than pursuing it. Women came to talk. Real talk, not the performed version. Julia Moretti, whose husband ran the southern ports, sat beside her for 20 minutes and spoke with a frankness that suggested she had been saving it for someone she trusted to understand the subtext. Old Signora Castellano herself, who had outlasted 3 generations of the men in this world and wore the fact of it lightly, pressed Bianca's hand between both of hers when they greeted each other and said, quietly, "You look like yourself tonight," which was either a compliment or an observation or both, and Bianca received it as all 3. She was aware of Dante across the room. She had always been aware of him in rooms that had not changed, might never fully change, was a fact about herself she had decided to stop arguing with. But the quality of her awareness had shifted. She was not monitoring his mood, not calibrating her behavior against his position in the room, not keeping half her attention on him as a weather system that might require her to adjust. She was simply aware of him the way you are aware of a room's architecture, present, noted, not in charge of your movement. He was watching her. She knew it without looking directly. Sal Ferri was talking and Dante was nodding in the way that meant he was processing and responding on some partial frequency, while the larger portion of his attention was somewhere else entirely. She could feel the somewhere else. She did not look over. Later in the evening, as the dinner tables were cleared and the room loosened into something less formal, a man she didn't recognize approached her from the left, youngish, well-dressed, with the slightly too easy confidence of someone who had learned to perform it. He introduced himself as Marco Esposito, said something pleasantly meaningless about the evening, and asked how she was finding the city lately, as though they were at a garden party in a normal world. She was mid-answer, perfectly pleasant, entirely at ease, when she felt Dante appear beside her. Not touching her. Just there, the specific gravity of him arriving at her shoulder like a change in atmospheric pressure. Marco Esposito's eyes moved to Dante and his pleasant expression underwent a swift, involuntary recalibration. "Marco," Dante said. His voice was the same as always. Controlled. Unhurried. Catastrophically calm. "Dante." Marco Esposito smiled the smile of a man rapidly reassessing his evening. "Congratulations on the Genoa development. I heard it went well." It did. A pause, precisely measured. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." Marco Esposito enjoyed the rest of his evening elsewhere. Bianca took a sip of her wine. She did not thank Dante. She did not acknowledge the territorial mechanics of what had just happened, or the fact that his hand, very briefly, had come to rest at the small of her back in a gesture that was less affection than declaration. A flag planted in ground he had spent 3 years leaving unattended. "I was having a perfectly fine conversation," she said. "I know," he said. "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately. Across the room, the Castellano brothers were laughing at something. The flowers on the nearest table were cream and white and enormous. "Because," Dante said finally, in a voice so low it was almost not a voice at all, "I don't know who he is to you." Bianca looked at him then. Really looked, the way she had stopped letting herself look because looking cost too much. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the middle distance, not on her, because Dante Cavallo had never once in his life found it easy to look directly at a thing that was undoing him. She felt something in her chest that she firmly told to sit down. "You should have thought about that," she said pleasantly, 3 years ago. She set her glass on a passing tray and went to find Signora Castellano, and she did not look back, and the purple dress moved around her like it had been waiting its whole life for exactly this room, exactly this evening, exactly this version of the woman wearing it. The office was on the 4th floor of a building that had no reason to be interesting, which was precisely why Bianca had chosen it. Via Tortona, in the working district south of the Navigli, not the glamorous part where the design studios had colonized the old factories and filled them with expensive light, but the quieter stretch where the buildings were still mostly buildings, where people came to work rather than to be seen working. The elevator was slow. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old radiators. The frosted glass panel on the door read Adiemi Russo Consulting in plain dark lettering, and it looked exactly like what it was. A small, legitimate, moderately successful logistics consultancy that sourced goods efficiently across the European supply chain and charged a reasonable fee for the confidence. It was also, quietly, doing extraordinarily well. Bianca arrived at 9 most mornings. Later on the days she went to Giulia's studio first, and left by 6 or 7, depending on what needed doing. She had told no one in the Cavallo world that she worked. This had not required any particular deception on her part. It had simply required that no one ask, and no one had. She was Dante's wife. Her days were presumably filled with the maintenance of being Dante's wife, which in the imagination of the people around them involved shopping and lunches, and the kind of charitable involvement that looked good in photographs. That she might have developed, in the 3 years of her marriage's long silence, an entirely separate professional confidence, this possibility had apparently not presented itself for consideration. Precious had started the consultancy 2 years before Bianca came in as a partner. She had an MBA from Bocconi and a supply chain mind that operated like a piece of precision machinery, fast, unsentimental, always looking 3 moves ahead. What she lacked, in the early years, was the particular social fluency required to navigate the old money networks that controlled access to the most profitable European contracts. She could identify the opportunity. She sometimes struggled to get herself into the room. Bianca could get herself into any room. It had taken them 4 months to agree on terms, which mostly involved Precious presenting increasingly detailed financial projections while Bianca asked questions until she understood every line of them. And eventually they had settled on an arrangement that was fair and documented and witnessed by a lawyer who was not connected to the Cavallo family in any capacity. Bianca had been very specific about that. What she did, in practice, was a thing she had apparently always been capable of, but had spent 3 years applying exclusively to the management of her marriage. She read people. She understood, in the particular way that women who have learned to be careful tend to understand, what a person needed to feel comfortable before they were willing to do business. She knew which clients needed to be listened to at length before they could hear any proposal. She knew which ones wanted directness above all else and would lose respect for you if you softened your pitch to accommodate their comfort. She knew how to sit in a meeting and let the silence do the work that words would only complicate. The morning after the Castellano dinner, she arrived at the office with a flat white from the cafe downstairs and found Precious already at her desk, reading something on her laptop with the focused intensity she brought to documents she considered important. Precious looked up. Read Bianca's face the way she always did, quickly, comprehensively, without being asked. "The dinner," she said. It was not a question. "The dinner," Bianca confirmed. She sat down, set her coffee on the desk, and told her about Marco Esposito and the hand at the small of her back and the 9 words Dante had said in a voice so low it had barely been a voice at all. Precious listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Precious, and which indicated she understood the weight of it. "He's waking up," she said when Bianca finished. "He's noticing a loss of control," Bianca said. "That's not the same thing." Precious tilted her head, conceding the distinction. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to come to work," Bianca said. "I'm going to do the Bergamo proposal and the call with the Rotterdam office at 3, and I'm going to have lunch with Signora Ferretti about the Milan procurement contract. Same as I would have done regardless." Precious looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled, not the wide one she deployed in meetings to disarm people, but the smaller, private one that was actual feeling. "You know," she said, "when you first came to me with this idea, I thought you needed a project. Something to occupy you. And you run a tighter ship than I do," Precious said, with the specific satisfaction of someone who had been proven right about something and found it genuinely gratifying rather than merely vindicating. "The Rotterdam client called me last week just to say that you were wonderful." Bianca took a sip of her coffee. "I know. I saw the email." What Dante did not know, what no one in his world knew, was that the consultancy had, in the past 18 months, extended its network into a territory that was adjacent to his without touching it. Not deliberately. The work had simply grown the way good work does, following the logic of its own competence. They had begun working with a shipping consortium on the northern coast whose routes intersected, at several points, with the supply corridors that the Cavallo family used for their less documented operations. They did not know this. The consortium did not know this. Only Bianca knew, because Bianca had started learning, quietly and with great patience, the map of her husband's world, not to use it against him, but because understanding the landscape you actually lived in had come to seem, after 3 years of willful blindness, like a basic requirement for survival. She had told Precious only that some of their logistics partners required extra discretion. Precious, who had not been born yesterday and was not operating under any illusions about the city's economy, had asked no specific questions and implemented the discretion with her customary efficiency. The Bergamo proposal took most of the morning. It was detailed work, cost modeling, route optimization, a risk analysis that required her to think carefully about variables most clients preferred not to name directly, and she lost herself in it in the way she had come to love most about this work, the way it required all of her and rewarded her fully for what she brought. By noon the proposal was done and she was satisfied with it, the quiet satisfaction of a thing made properly. Her phone sat on the desk face up. No messages from the penthouse. She had not expected any. What she did not know, sitting in her 4th-floor office that smelled of floor wax and good coffee and the particular productive quiet of work being done well, was that 3 hours earlier, Dante had made a call. The kind of call he made when he wanted to know something that no one was going to tell him voluntarily. The kind of call that meant he had stopped simply noticing she was different and had begun, with the full machinery of who he was and what he was capable of, trying to find out why. She closed her laptop at 6. Put on her coat. Took the slow elevator down to the street. She had 43 minutes before he would hear the name of this building. She did not know that yet. She walked out into the early evening with her bag on her shoulder and her mind already on tomorrow's call with Rotterdam, and behind her the plain dark letters on the frosted glass caught the last of the corridor light, Adeyemi Russo Consulting. Quiet and clean and entirely hers. The report came back in under an hour. Ricci was efficient, had always been efficient, which was the primary reason Dante kept him at a distance. Men who were too good at finding things had a tendency to find things you hadn't planned on knowing. In 15 years of working together, Dante had used him sparingly and deliberately, the way you use a tool capable of more damage than the job requires. You kept it in the drawer. You didn't reach for it casually. He had reached for it casually. He told himself it was a security concern. That was the framing he used internally, standing at his office window at 7 in the morning with his phone in his hand and the city assembling itself below him in the early light. His wife was conducting business somewhere in this city under an arrangement he had known nothing about, using a version of her name, Russo, her birth name, her name before him, and intersecting with supply networks that bordered his own. This was, framed correctly, a legitimate operational concern. Due diligence. The kind of thing a man in his position was obligated to verify. He was not going to examine the fact that he had made the call at 6:15 a.m., before his coffee, before any of his actual operational calls, before anything else. Ricci's report was thorough and unambiguous. Adeyemi Russo Consulting, registered 18 months ago, co-founded by one Bianca Russo, your wife, Ricci had said with no particular inflection, because Ricci understood that inflection could get a man killed in certain conversations. And one precious Adeyemi. Legitimate. Clean. Not merely superficially clean, but genuinely, structurally clean. The kind of clean that either meant there was nothing to find or that the architecture was very good. Ricci had assessed it as the former and added, with the particular professional neutrality that made him invaluable, that the company had performed exceptionally well for its size. 2 major European clients. A third under negotiation. Revenue that was modest by the standards of Dante's world, but substantial by any other measure. Dante had thanked him and ended the call and stood for a while in his office not moving. His wife ran a company. His wife had been running a company for 18 months, arriving at an office on Via Tortona at 9 most mornings and staying until 6 or 7, and he had been 20 minutes away in this building, conducting his own days, and he had not known. It had not occurred to him to know. He had looked at the shape of her absence. She was not at the penthouse. He was aware of that. Some part of him had registered her absence the way you register a chair not being where it usually is, and he had not once thought to ask what the absence was for. He sat down at his desk. He tried to remember the last time he had asked Bianca how she was spending her days. The question moved through his memory like a coin dropped into deep water, turning slowly, sinking, finding no bottom. He could not remember what he did with this information, because he was Dante Cavallo, and Dante Cavallo did not sit with discomfort long enough to let it become anything he had to name, was begin to plan. He pulled up Ricci's report on his computer and read it again, more slowly this time, mapping the clients and the routes and the consortium connections with the part of his brain that ran on pure operational logic and had no access to the part that was doing something else entirely underneath. The Northern Shipping Consortium. He read that entry 3 times. He knew that consortium had worked with 2 of its members, indirectly, through layers of distance. He had constructed precisely so that the working relationship couldn't be traced back to anything that needed to remain untraceable. His routes didn't overlap with theirs directly, but they were adjacent. Close enough that someone who knew both maps could see the relationship between them, the way you can see the negative space in a painting once you know to look. Bianca knew supply chains. She had learned them, apparently, with the same quiet thoroughness she brought to everything, the same patience she had once brought to learning the grammar of his world, the names, the hierarchies, the unspoken protocols. He had watched her learn it and had thought, when he thought about it at all, that she was simply being a good wife. Adapting. Assimilating. She had been mapping the territory. He closed the report and opened his desk drawer and took out the burner phone he used for the calls that couldn't move through any traceable channel. He did not make a call. He held it and thought about what he was doing and why, which was not something Dante Cavallo did often, and which was therefore uncomfortable in the specific way that unused muscles are uncomfortable when you try to use them. What he was doing was tracking his wife. In the abstract, in the professional, operational, this is legitimate security review abstract. This was a defensible thing. In the actual reality of the specific morning on which he was doing it, sitting in his office before 8 a.m. with a burner phone in his hand because he couldn't stop thinking about an unfamiliar perfume and a dress the color of a bruise. It was something else. He knew it was something else. He did not put the phone down. He called Ricci back. He said, "Keep a loose eye. Nothing intrusive. Just patterns. Where she goes, what time, who she meets. He used the word routine and the word precautionary, and he did not use the word jealous, which was the word that sat at the back of his throat the entire time he was talking, insisting on itself with the particular insistence of true things that have been refused entry for too long. He had not been jealous in years. He had not been sufficiently engaged with another human being's inner life to generate the emotion. Jealousy required investment, and he had divested himself of it so thoroughly and efficiently that he had almost forgotten it was possible. Now here it was, a fire in a house he had left empty for 3 years, burning through rooms he hadn't entered in so long he had almost stopped believing they existed. Marco Esposito. The name came back to him at intervals throughout the day, a splinter. Ricci had confirmed Esposito was low-level, a peripheral figure in the Mancini family, no known connection to Bianca, which meant their conversation at the Castellano dinner was probably exactly what it had appeared to be, two people talking at a party. Dante knew this. He held the information in his mind, turned it over, confirmed its shape, and remained unable to do anything useful with it. He left the office at 7 that evening. He did not go directly to the penthouse. He found himself, with no particular decision-making process he could identify, driving past Via Tortona. The building was ordinary and dark, the business day long finished. The frosted glass on the 4th floor was unlit. He read the lettering from the street. Adeyemi Russo Consulting. Russo. Her name inside his. He sat in the car for a moment with the engine running. Then he drove home, because there was nothing to see, and he had already seen it, not the building, but himself, sitting outside his wife's office at night like a man who had misplaced something and couldn't remember what it was called or where he'd last set it down. He got into the elevator, straightened his jacket, put his face back in order. The penthouse was quiet. Her bedroom door was closed. He stood in the kitchen and made himself a whiskey he didn't drink and looked at the flowers on the table, fresh ones, white, in a vase she must have replaced sometime in the past 2 days, and understood, with the slow and brutal clarity of a man who had spent a long time refusing to see what was directly in front of him, that his wife had been building a life. Not away from him, necessarily. Not yet. But entirely without him. And the distance between those two things was closing faster than he knew how to stop. It rained for 3 days straight, the kind of October rain that didn't perform itself, no thunder, no drama, just a steady, gray, relentless presence that lowered the sky and made the city feel smaller and closer than usual. The Navigli flooded slightly on the second day. Via Tortona was passable but unpleasant. Bianca worked from the penthouse. This had not been a deliberate choice. The roof access of her building had a drainage problem that maintenance had been promising to address for 6 weeks. And on the second morning of the rain she had arrived to find the 4th floor hallway with 2 inches of water in it and Precious standing in it in Wellington boots she had apparently retrieved from somewhere, directing a facilities crew with the energy of a general who had studied this particular campaign in advance. Precious had looked at her, assessed the situation, and said, "Go home. I have this. There is nothing here that requires both of us to be wet." Bianca had gone home. She sat up at the kitchen table with her laptop and her files and a pot of coffee and told herself it was fine. The penthouse was quiet during the day. Dante was at his office. She had the table and the good light from the east windows and a view of the rain-gray city that was, in its way, beautiful. She worked through the morning without incident, finished the Rotterdam call, sent 3 emails that needed sending, and ate lunch standing at the kitchen counter because there was no one to sit down for. She was on the second pot of coffee when she heard his key in the door. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. She looked up from her laptop. Dante came in carrying his jacket over one arm, his shirt slightly damp at the shoulder from the walk between the car and the building's entrance, his phone in his hand. He saw her at the kitchen table and stopped with the specific quality of stillness he had when something had surprised him and he was deciding how to absorb it before his face registered anything. "The drainage," she said. "At the office. I'm working from here." A beat. "I know," he said. Ricci mentioned the building. She absorbed this with a steadiness she had spent 3 years developing. He had been watching the building. Of course he had. She filed it away and kept her expression where it was. "Why are you here at 2 in the afternoon?" she asked. The Genoa matter resolved early. He set his jacket over the back of a chair and loosened his collar button with the distracted efficiency of a man who was thinking about something other than what his hands were doing. "I have calls this evening. I was going to work from here." She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen table had 6 chairs, and she was sitting at one end of it, her files arranged around her, her laptop open, and there was no version of this afternoon in which they were not going to be in the same space for the next several hours. "Fine," she said, and looked back at her screen. He worked from the study. For approximately 40 minutes this arrangement held, each of them on their separate frequencies, the rain maintaining its steady commentary against the windows. Then she heard him come back to the kitchen for coffee, she assumed, and instead he came and stood near the table and said, without particular preamble, "What is the Rotterdam situation?" She looked up. "Sorry. The call this morning. You mentioned Rotterdam when you were setting up." He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter with the cup in his hand. Not sitting down. Not committing to the conversation, but not leaving it either. "I know that shipping corridor. What's the work?" She considered him for a moment. Considered the question, which was specific enough to be genuine and professional enough to be safe, which was precisely the kind of question Dante asked when he wanted to have a conversation and couldn't allow himself to arrive at it directly. She told him about the Rotterdam contract. Not everything, not the consortium adjacency she had been navigating carefully for 3 months, not the names she had started to recognize on documents that arrived with his world's fingerprints on them. But the structure of it, the logistics problem they were solving, the reason it was a good contract. She spoke the way she spoke in her own office, precisely, without apology, with the full weight of knowing what she was talking about. He listened. This was the first thing that undid her, slightly. He listened the way he had listened in the beginning, the early months, when everything she said seemed to locate him in the room more firmly, as though her voice was a signal he was calibrating toward. He had stopped listening like that somewhere in the first year, and she had not realized how much she had missed it until it was happening again, across her own kitchen table, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon while it rained. He asked a question. A good one, the kind that meant he had understood the problem and was already thinking 2 steps ahead of it. She answered it. He asked another. And then, before she had fully understood how it had happened, they were talking. Really talking, the way they had talked in the beginning, in the garden at the Brera exhibition, and in the car rides afterward, and in the long evenings in his apartment before this one, when she had thought the depth of his attention was the permanent condition rather than the exception. It was disorienting, the way a familiar smell in an unexpected place is disorienting, pulling you backward before you can consent to the movement. He told her something about the Genoa matter. Not the details, there were details Dante Cavallo would take to his grave, but the shape of it, the negotiation, the particular kind of patience it had required. He said it in the dry, precise way he had of describing things he found interesting. The interior lit up briefly, and she recognized him in it. The him that had been there first, before the distance had set in and hardened into something structural. This was the problem with Dante Cavallo. This had always been the problem. He was not 2 different people, the man who had seen her and the man who had stopped. He was one person with a capacity for presence that he rationed with brutal, seemingly arbitrary discipline, and on the days he opened it, even slightly, the effect was entirely unfair. She knew this. She sat with her hands around her coffee cup and her laptop open, and she knew this with the full clarity of a woman who had spent 3 years learning the cost of it. At some point the afternoon light shifted, the rain easing to something lighter, and she realized they had been talking for nearly 2 hours. The Rotterdam files were still open on her screen, untouched for the last 90 minutes. He realized it at the same time. She saw it, the slight adjustment, the return of the careful neutrality, like a man remembering where he had set down his armor and retrieving it. He stood up, took his cup to the sink. The consortium contact in Rotterdam, he said, his back to her, rinsing the cup with the focused attention of someone who needed something to do with their hands. His name is Hendrik Voss. Tell him Cavallo sends regards. It will make the negotiation easier. She looked at his back, at the ink at the base of his neck above his collar, at the set of his shoulders, which were doing the thing they did when he was working very hard to keep something contained. Why would you do that? She said quietly. He turned off the tap, dried his hands, turned around, and for just a moment, one unguarded, unmanaged moment, he looked at her with something so close to the way he had looked at her in the beginning that her chest tightened with a feeling she had absolutely no use for. Because it's a good contract, he said. And you built it. He picked up his jacket from the chair and walked back toward the study. She heard the door close. Not the final click she had spent 3 years learning not to take personally. A softer one. As though he were being careful. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, her hands around a cup that had gone cold, the Rotterdam files still open on her screen. Stop it, she told herself. You know exactly how this works. You have always known. Outside, the rain continued its quiet, indifferent descent. She opened the Rotterdam file and went back to work. But her hands, for a while, were not entirely steady. She met Elena Mancini at a charity luncheon she had been attending for 2 years without incident. The event was held at the Palazzo Reale, a fundraiser for a children's hospital foundation, the kind of thing that drew the city's legitimate wealth and its less legitimate wealth into the same room under the useful fiction that shared philanthropy neutralized other distinctions. Bianca attended because she genuinely liked the foundation's director, a woman named Dottoressa Ferrara who had the energy of someone powered by a cleaner fuel source than everyone around her. And because the luncheon was on her calendar and she saw no reason to remove it. Elena Mancini she had seen before, at the Castellano dinner, at 2 or 3 other events over the years, in the way you see people who exist at the periphery of your social orbit without ever intersecting it. Early 30s, dark-haired, with the particular poise of a woman who had been trained to enter rooms well. She was Giacomo Mancini's youngest sister, which meant she was the Mancini family's most presentable representative in rooms like this one, which in turn meant her presence at any given event was not accidental. She appeared at Bianca's table during the pre-lunch reception with a glass of Prosecco and the relaxed confidence of someone arriving somewhere she had planned to be. "You're Bianca Cavallo," she said. Not a question, and not quite an introduction, more the opening of a conversation she had already rehearsed. "I've been hoping we'd have a chance to talk properly." Bianca looked at her, registered the preparation behind these, smiled with the portion of her warmth that was available for professional use. "Elena," she said, "I know who you are." Elena smiled back, a real one, Bianca noted, which was more interesting than a performed one would have been. "Then we can skip the part where we pretend to be strangers." She sat down with the fluid confidence of someone who had decided she was welcome. "I've heard things about your work. The consultancy on Via Tortona." Something in Bianca's chest became very still, the way things go still before they need to move quickly. "Small world," Bianca said. "Milan in particular." Elena turned her Prosecco glass by the stem. "The logistics work is clever. Good margins for the size, from what I understand. And the Rotterdam relationship is, well, someone knows what they're doing." The information was too specific to be casual. Bianca understood, with a clarity that required no processing time, that she was not at a charity luncheon having a coincidental conversation. She was being approached. The Prosecco and the Palazzo Reale and the easy smile were the architecture of it, but the structure underneath was something else entirely. She took a sip of her water and waited. Elena set her glass down. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped a register, still pleasant, still controlled, but with the outer layer of social performance thinned to something more direct. I'll be honest with you, because I think you'd find anything else tedious. I would, Bianca agreed. The Mancini family has interests that overlap with some of your consortium connections. We've been looking for a channel that moves cleanly, no Cavallo involvement, no exposure on our side. Your company is structured well for it. A pause. And you have a specific kind of leverage that would make a partnership straightforward. Bianca looked at her. You're unhappy, Elena said. Simply as though reading a documented fact. Everyone at the Castellano dinner saw it. The dress, the way you moved through the room, you're a woman who has decided something. We're not sure what yet. But whatever it is, the Cavallo name is not at the center of it anymore. She tilted her head. That makes you useful to us. And us potentially useful to you. There it was. Bianca sat with it for a moment. Sat with the specific coldness of being read correctly by someone who intended to use what they'd read. Sat with the faint, nauseating clarity of understanding that what she had believed was a private reclamation of herself had been visible enough to be catalogued by the Mancini family and converted into a strategic asset. She thought about the Tuesday in November. The sink. The flowers she had put on the table every week for 3 years in a home that had received them without remark. She thought about Via Tortona and the Rotterdam files and the particular quality of the work she had built with her own judgment and Precious's mind, clean and good and entirely removed from rooms like this one. And she thought about Dante. Not the Dante of the past 3 years, the one who had moved through their shared life, like a man who had already settled his accounts. The Dante of 2 weeks ago, standing at the kitchen sink with his back to her, telling her that Hendrik Voss would take his call. Because it's a good contract. And you built it. She had not come this far to become someone else's instrument. Let me make sure I understand you, Bianca said. Her voice was pleasant. It was a very controlled pleasantness. You've identified that my marriage is under some strain, and your family's position is that this makes me available for use as a channel into my husband's operations, or possibly as a liability that could be leveraged against him, depending on how cooperative I am. Elena's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough to indicate that she had expected more maneuver before the anatomy of the thing was named. That's a blunt way to put it, she said. You said you thought I'd find anything else tedious. Bianca set down her water glass. You were right. So here is my answer, which I'll also keep blunt. I am not unhappy. I am clarifying. Those are different conditions, and they require different responses. My business has no relationship to my marriage and will not acquire one. And anything you have learned about my company structure or clients I would encourage you to forget, because the next conversation I have about that information will be with my husband, and it will be detailed. The word husband landed the way she intended it to, not as sentiment, but as a boundary drawn in a language the Mancini family spoke fluently. Elena was quiet for a moment. A long one. Then she sat back, and something in her expression rearranged itself into something that was almost, unexpectedly, respect. You're sure, Elena said. I built something real, Bianca said. I'm not going to let it be used as a side door into someone else's war. Including my husband's. Elena picked up her Prosecco. Considered it. Most women in your position. I'm not most women in my position. Bianca stood, smoothed her jacket, picked up her bag. Enjoy the luncheon, Elena. The foundation does genuinely good work. I hope you give generously. She walked away with the same unhurried directness she had been practicing in a parking garage and a kitchen and a penthouse hallway and a purple dress, and she did not look back. She called Precious from the car before she had even started the engine. Precious picked up on the second ring. Bianca told her everything, in order, without editorial. There was a short silence on the other end of the line. The Mancinis, Precious said. Yes. Another silence, this one the particular quality of Precious doing rapid structural thinking. Are you going to tell him? Bianca looked out through the windshield at the Palazzo Real's pale facade, at the people moving in and out of its doors with their good intentions and their complicated money. She had spent 3 years not needing to tell Dante anything. Not needing him for anything. building a life that was hers in the clean, uncomplicated sense of that word. But the Mancinis had just drawn a line between her world and his, and lines like that, once drawn, had consequences whether you acknowledged them or not. "Yes," she said. "I'm going to tell him." She started the car. Outside, the city moved around her in its ordinary, intricate, oblivious life, and she drove toward a conversation she had not planned on having, with a man she had not planned on needing, about a problem that had just made the distance between them irrelevant. She found him awake. This no longer surprised her. In the weeks since the purple dress, he had developed a new geography of the penthouse after dark. She would come home to find him in the living room, or at the bar cart, or standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city with the particular stillness of a man who had too much to think about and nowhere to put it. He had stopped going to bed before her. She had not commented on this. Neither had he. It had simply become the new architecture of their evenings, the way his distance had once become the architecture of their days, a thing that happened until it was the condition. Tonight he was at the window. He turned when she came in, and she saw immediately that something was different. Not in his posture, that was the same controlled, unrevealing stillness she had catalogued over 3 years. But in his eyes, which were on her with an attention so complete and undefended that she stopped moving for just a moment before she remembered how to continue. "Sit down," he said. Not a request. Not quite a command. Something between them that she had never heard him use with her before, a register that carried weight without force, the voice of a man who needed the conversation and didn't know how to need things gracefully. She sat. Not because he told her to. Because she had decided on the drive home that she was going to have this conversation properly, and properly required being still. He remained at the window for a moment, then crossed the room and sat across from her, not in his usual position at the far end of the sofa, but close, the coffee table between them, close enough that she could see the exact quality of what was in his face. She had forgotten, or made herself forget, that Dante Cavallo could be hard to look at directly when he was not managing himself. He was not managing himself. "Ricci tells me you had lunch at the Palazzo Reale today," he said. "A charity luncheon," she said. "I've been going for 2 years. Elena Mancini was there." She was. "She sat with you for 20 minutes. Bianca looked at him. At the jaw set tight as a closed door, at the hands resting on his knees with a deliberate looseness that was costing him something. At the man who had put a surveillance architecture around her life and was now sitting across from her with the results of it and still, could not find the direct language for what he actually wanted to know. "You've had someone watching me," she said. "I've had someone ensuring your safety. Dante." He stopped. The word, just his name, just the shape of it in her mouth, with no particular inflection, but a great deal of precision, landed in the space between them and took up room. "Yes," he said. "I've had someone watching you." She nodded once. This was not the confrontation she had come home to have. But it was the one they were having, and she had learned by now that conversations with Dante rarely went through the door you aimed for. They found their own entry points. "Then you already know what she said to me," Bianca said. "I know what Ricci observed. Which is that she spoke to you at length and you left separately." He paused. "I don't know what was said. She offered me a business arrangement," Bianca said. "Through my consultancy. She used my apparent unhappiness as the entry point. The assumption was that a neglected Cavallo wife would be available for use, either as a channel into your operations or as a liability against you, depending on how the conversation went." She watched him absorb this. Watched the controlled stillness sharpen into something colder and more focused, the operational mind engaging, the personal replaced temporarily by the professional, which was the only way Dante Cavallo knew how to manage a thing that was both at once. "What did you tell her?" he said. "I told her no. I told her my business had no relationship to my marriage and would not acquire one. I told her the next conversation I had about her family's interest in my client structure would be with you." She paused. "And then I came home to tell you." Something moved in his face. Brief, almost imperceptible. She had spent enough time studying his face to catch things that the rest of the world missed. "You should have told me about the company," he said. "Probably," she said. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. The silence said enough, not a denial, not a deflection, just the quiet of a man sitting inside a question he couldn't argue his way out of. And then, because he was Dante and Dante had never once in his life arrived at a thing gently, he said, "Who is he?" She went very still. "The man you've been seeing," he said. His voice was controlled. Catastrophically controlled, the way pressure is controlled behind something engineered to contain it. "I've had someone on your movements for 3 weeks. You go to the office. You go to the studio on the canal. You have dinner with Precious twice a week. You come home at midnight." He stopped. "I cannot find a man." Which means either Ricci is losing his edge or there is no man. And if there is no man, then I need you to explain to me what exactly has changed. Because something has changed and it is. He stopped again. The hands on his knees were no longer loose. "It is making me lose my mind." Bianca looked at him for a long time. At the ink climbing his neck above his collar. At the hands she had watched clench and unclench in the kitchen the night she came home in the purple dress. At the face of the man she had married, which was currently as unmanaged as she had ever seen it, stripped down to something she recognized from the Brera garden, from the car rides afterward, from the version of him that existed before the distance had set in and calcified. She felt the familiar pull of it, acknowledged it, did not move toward it. "There is no man," she said. He exhaled, one short, controlled breath that told her exactly how much he had been carrying that question. "Then what?" "I've been seeing myself," she said. "For the first time in 3 years." He looked at her. "I don't mean that as a provocation," she said. "I mean it as a fact. When I married you, I was a woman who knew herself very well. I had opinions and a voice and a particular way of moving through the world that was mine. And somewhere in the first year of our marriage, I began putting those things in storage. Not because you demanded it. You never demanded anything of me, Dante. You simply stopped requiring me. And I was so committed to the idea that you would come back to me, that the man I fell in love with in that garden was a permanent condition rather than a season, that I kept making myself smaller while I waited." She paused. "And then I stopped waiting. And I started coming back to myself. And what you've been reading as absence, as distance, as evidence of another man, it's not that. It's me, taking up space again. In my own life." The penthouse was absolutely quiet. Outside, the city moved in its distant, indifferent glow. Dante sat with her words the way he sat with things he couldn't resolve immediately, which was the only way she had ever seen him sit with anything fully, without flinching, giving the weight of it its proper due. "I stopped requiring you," he said finally. Not a question. The tone of a man reading a verdict he had written himself. "You stopped seeing me," she said. "It amounts to the same thing." He stood up, walked to the window. She watched his reflection in the glass, the set of his shoulders, the bowed head, the hands that had gone into his pockets where she couldn't see what they were doing. "The Mancinis will move on this," he said. The operational mind, back in the room. Elena was a preliminary contact. When she reports back with a refusal, they'll recalibrate. "I know," Bianca said. "Your company could become a pressure point. Your consortium contacts. I know that too." He turned from the window, looked at her across the room with an expression she didn't have a category for, not the controlled neutrality, not the brief unguarded moments she had caught at the sink and at the Castellano dinner. Something more total than either. Something that had been a long time arriving and had finally, at midnight in their quiet penthouse, come through the door. "I'm not going to let anything happen to what you've built," he said. It was not an apology. She understood it was not an apology. It was something more complicated than that, and less, and she was not going to mistake it for resolution just because it felt, in this particular moment, like the beginning of something. "I know," she said, for the 3rd time. But this time she meant something different by it. She picked up her bag from the entry table and walked toward her bedroom, and this time, For the first time, she felt him watching her go, not with the indifference of a man who had stopped seeing her, but with the full, undefended attention of one who had just understood, at considerable cost to himself, exactly what he had been looking at all along. She closed the door, stood in the dark of her room with her back against it, and her heart doing something she firmly told it to stop. It didn't stop. Precious called at 2:10 in the morning. Bianca was not asleep. She had not been asleep since the confrontation 4 days ago, not fully, not in the way that actually restores anything. She had been moving through her days with the careful, deliberate energy of someone navigating a floor they are not entirely certain will hold, going to the office, doing the work, coming home to a penthouse where Dante was present in a way he had not been present in 3 years, attentive, watchful, in the room rather than merely occupying it, and telling herself that attentiveness was not the same as change, and that change, even if it was real, would need to be measured in something longer than 4 days before she could trust its dimensions. She picked up on the first ring. The Rotterdam Consortium, Precious said. No greeting, which meant the situation had already moved past the point where greetings were relevant. Hendrik Voss called me an hour ago. He's been contacted by a third party claiming to represent a Milanese logistics group looking to acquire our contract position. He thought it was a standard competitive approach. I don't think it's a standard competitive approach. Bianca sat up. He gave you a name? A company name. Registered 3 months ago. Shell structure, I ran it back as far as I could in the last hour. A pause. It routes to a holding entity connected to the Mancini family. The cold that moved through her was not surprise. It was the particular sensation of having known something was coming and being caught by it anyway, the way you can know a winter is approaching and still be unprepared for the specific morning the temperature drops. They're not after the contract, Bianca said. No, Precious said. The contract is the door. If they acquire our position in the consortium, they have access to the routing architecture we've been building for 18 months. Which means they have a map of the adjacencies, Bianca said quietly. To Dante's operations. Silence on the line, the kind that meant Precious was doing the thing she did when she understood the full shape of a problem and was deciding how to hold it. Bia, she said. How bad is this? I don't know yet, Bianca said. Give me an hour. She was dressed in 4 minutes. In the hallway she stopped, stood outside Dante's study, and listened. A light was on under the door. She knocked once and opened it without waiting. He was at his desk with 3 phones in front of him and a look on his face she had never seen before. Not the controlled neutrality, not the stripped-down honesty of 4 nights ago. This was operational crisis, the face of a man whose machinery was running at full capacity and still not fast enough. He looked up. Read her face the way he had been learning, lately, to read her face. You know, he said. Precious called me. The Mancinis are moving through the consortium. She came fully into the room. How long have you known? An hour. Ricci flagged the company acquisition attempt at 1 a.m. He stood, and she saw it then, the way he was holding his left side, the jacket he had not taken off, the careful management of his movement that had nothing to do with his usual stillness. It's not just the consortium. They hit a Cavallo transport point in Seagrate tonight. 2 men down. Dante. Her voice had changed. Are you hurt? I'm fine. You are holding your ribs like they're not fine. He stopped trying to look like he wasn't holding his ribs. It cost him something, the stopping. She could see it in the fractional rearrangement of his expression, the minute giving up of the performance. A disagreement in Seagrate before Ricci called. It's handled. It is not handled if you're standing in your study at 2 in the morning bleeding through your shirt, she said, which was when she saw that he was, in fact, bleeding through his shirt. The dark fabric of his jacket concealing it until she was close enough to be standing in front of him in his study with the full inventory of what was happening visible. She told him to sit down. He sat, which told her more about the severity of it than anything else could have. She knew the penthouse's medical supplies in the way she knew every practical thing about the home she had built inside his comprehensively, because she had been the one to stock them. She had what she needed. She worked quickly and without flinching, which she discovered she was capable of without having known it, cutting away the shirt fabric with the small scissors from the first aid kit and assessing what was there, a laceration along the left side, deep but clean. Not arterial, not requiring a hospital if it was managed properly, and he did not do anything that reopened it for the next 72 hours. She told him this. 72 hours, he repeated, with the tone of a man for whom 72 hours of physical restraint was an abstract and largely inapplicable concept. 72 hours, she said, in the tone of someone for whom the statement was not a suggestion. While she worked, she told him everything she knew about the consortium structure, the routing architecture, the adjacencies, the specific corridor the Mancinis were trying to access. She told him the name of the shell company. She told him what Precious had traced and where the trace had stopped and why. She told him about Hendrik Voss and the acquisition approach and the 3-month timeline on the shell company's registration, which meant this had been in planning since before Elena Mancini had sat down next to her at a charity luncheon with a glass of Prosecco and a prepared conversation. Dante listened. She had always known he was good at listening when he decided something warranted it. He listened now with an absolute, uninterrupted attention, asking one question at the exact right moment to confirm he had understood something correctly, and then going quiet again, integrating what she was telling him into whatever map he was building behind his eyes. When she finished, he said, "Voss." "Yes. If we move Voss before the acquisition completes, get him to decline the approach and restructure the consortium access, the Mancinis lose the door." "That's what I think," she said. "But Voss won't do it for a consultancy he's worked with for 8 months. He needs a reason large enough to walk away from what looks like a competitive offer." "He needs a name," Dante said. "Something that tells him the cost of taking that acquisition is higher than the value of the contract." "A Cavallo name," she said. He looked at her. "Yes." She tied off the last of the bandaging with a precision that surprised her, smoothed the tape flat, and sat back. He was watching her hands. She didn't look up immediately. "Then we go to him together," she said. A silence. "Together," Dante said. Not a question this time. Testing the shape of the word. "My relationship with Voss." "Your name." She looked up then. Met his eyes across the narrow distance between them, she on her heels, him on the edge of the desk chair, his shirt open, the bandaging white and clean against his side. "Separately, we can't close this. Together, we can close it in a phone call." He held her gaze. It was the longest he had held it without looking away in 3 years, possibly longer, and it was doing the thing his gaze had always done to her when he directed the full and unmanaged weight of it at a single point, which she had spent the better part of 3 years protecting herself from feeling. She didn't look away either. "Make the call," he said quietly. She stood, picked up her phone, walked to the window, because Hendrik Voss was in Rotterdam and Rotterdam was an hour behind, and it was still just late enough that he might answer a call from a number he recognized. He answered on the 3rd ring. She told him, in the measured, precise language of a woman who understood exactly what she was saying and why, that the acquisition approach he had received was not what it appeared to be. That accepting it would expose him to relationships he did not want on his balance sheet, and that she had a name she wanted him to hear, which she would give him now if he was in a position to receive it. He said he was. She turned and looked at Dante. He held her gaze. Nodded once. She gave Hendrik Voss the name. The call took 11 minutes. When she hung up, the consortium acquisition was functionally dead. Voss would make 2 more calls in the morning that would confirm it, but the decision was made, the door was closed, and the Mancinis had lost the 6 months of positioning they had laid against the foundation of her work and his world. The penthouse was very quiet. "It's done," she said. Dante was still watching her from the desk chair with his shirt open and her bandaging on his ribs and the 3 phones on the desk in front of him, and the expression on his face was not one she had a category for. It was past what she had seen 4 nights ago. Past the confrontation, past the stripped-down honesty of "I cannot find a man, and it is making me lose my mind." It was the expression of a man who had just watched someone save something of his and had understood, fully, irreversibly, that the saving had cost her nothing because the person doing it was simply that capable. He had known she was intelligent. He had married her knowing it. He had not, until this moment, understood that he had been living beside a woman who was, in the ways that mattered most in his world, his equal. "Bianca," he said. "Don't," she said. Not harshly. Gently, almost, with the gentleness of someone who understood that what he wanted to say next deserved more than 2 in the morning and a study and a bandaged side. "Not tonight." He closed his mouth. She crossed the room and picked up the ruined shirt from the floor and folded it, for no reason except that she was the kind of woman who folded things, and set it on the edge of the desk. Then she went to her room. She did not stand against the door this time. She lay down on her bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about 11 minutes on a phone call, and Hendrik Voss, and a name she had asked for and received, and a man sitting in his study in her bandaging who had looked at her like he had just been told something he had needed to know for a very long time and couldn't believe how long it had taken him to hear it. Her heart was not behaving. She had stopped asking it to. He came to find her on a Sunday. Not her office, it was closed, the way the office was always closed on Sundays, which was the one day Bianca had designated entirely her own from the beginning, not because the work required it, but because she did. He came to Julia's studio on the canal, which meant he had asked someone where she went on Sunday mornings, which meant Ricci still had eyes on her, or had until recently. Or Dante had simply memorized her patterns in the way he memorized everything that mattered to him operationally. She wasn't sure yet which of those things it was. She was standing outside on the canal-side pavement after class, her coat on, her bag over one shoulder, watching the water do its slow green work against the stones, when she heard his step behind her. She knew his step. She had always known it. She turned around. He looked better than he had 5 days ago, no jacket, dark sweater, the kind of deliberate casualness that meant he had thought about how he wanted to arrive at this conversation. The ribs were still troubling him. She could see it in the slight adjustment of how he was standing, the weight distributed a fraction more to the right. But he was here, on a Sunday morning, on a canal pavement, which was the farthest from his operational world she had ever seen him travel for something that wasn't work. He had not brought Ricci. "How did you know where I was?" she said. "I asked Precious," he said. She absorbed this. Precious had not warned her. She would be having a conversation with Precious about that, at some point, though the more she thought about it the more she suspected Precious had made a deliberate decision and would defend it with characteristic confidence and zero apology. "She told you," Bianca said. "She told me where you'd be," he said. "She also told me, and I'm quoting precisely, because I think she intended it to be repeated, that I had approximately 1 remaining chance, and that she had very specific ideas about what would happen to me if I wasted it." A pause. I believe her. Despite herself, despite the morning and the canal and the weight of everything that had been building for 3 years and 5 days and one 11-minute phone call, something moved in her chest that was close to a laugh. She pressed it down. Mostly. He watched her do it. Something in his face opened slightly, the way a window admits light, not dramatically, just the change from closed to not closed. "I want to talk to you," he said. "Not about the Mancinis. Not about Voss or the consortium or the operational situation. About us." He stopped. Started again, which was unusual enough that she gave it her complete attention. Dante Cavallo did not, as a rule, start again. He said things once, correctly, and moved on. "About what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Bianca, I didn't close that operation because you owe me something. I closed it because it was my company and my work, and they were using it as a door into your world, and I wasn't going to allow that. I know why you did it, he said. That's not, he stopped again. Turned briefly toward the canal, looked at the water, turned back. That's not what I'm here for. She waited. 3 years, he said. I know what I did, and I know what it cost you, and I am not going to reduce it to an apology, because it is not something an apology covers. What I did was, I had something extraordinary, and I treated it like furniture. I know that. I've known it since the night you walked in wearing that dress, and I couldn't breathe, and I realized I had spent 3 years choosing not to see a person who was right in front of me. He paused. I don't have a justification for it. I've looked for one. I don't have one. The canal moved. A boat passed somewhere further along, its wake reaching them in small, quiet increments. She looked at him and felt the full weight of it, not just this morning, but all the mornings that had preceded it. The lamb dinner on a Tuesday in November. The whiskey gone warm. The Tuesday mornings she had woken up and remade the decision to stay, to wait, to make herself a little smaller, until the morning she had remade the decision, and it had come out differently. I rebuilt myself, she said. Without you. I need you to understand that's not a temporary condition. I'm not going to put those things back in storage because this is easier for you now. The company is mine. My work is mine. The person I've become in the last 18 months is mine. Whatever comes next has to hold all of that. Yes, he said. She looked at him. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you. He stopped for the 3rd time, and this time it was long enough that she understood he was finding language for something he had never tried to say before, which for Dante was its own kind of event. I'm asking if there's a version of Forward that includes me. Not the version where you manage the penthouse and attend the dinners and make yourself smaller so I can stay comfortable. A different version. He held her gaze. You know things about my world that took men around me years to learn. You have relationships I don't have access to. You closed a 6-month Mancini operation in 11 minutes using a consortium contact and a phone and your own judgment. You did not need me to do any of that. He paused. I want to build something with someone who doesn't need me. Because it means that when she's there, she's choosing to be. She stood on the canal pavement and felt the city around her, the water, the old stones, the distant sound of Sunday morning Milan assembling itself, coffee and bells, and the particular quiet of a day that wasn't performing anything for anyone. She thought about the Tuesday in November and the promise she had made to herself at the kitchen sink. Not anymore. She had kept it. She had built something real. She had come back to herself so fully that she was standing here now as a complete person, not a woman in need of rescue or recognition, not a woman waiting for a man to assign her her own worth. She was Bianca Russo. She had also, legally, always been Bianca Cavallo. She had been trying to decide for 3 months what that second name meant to her now, whether it was a constraint or simply a fact. Whether it was the cage Nana Sarah had warned her about or something she had never actually examined clearly because she had been too busy grieving what was inside it. She looked at Dante Cavallo on a Sunday morning on a canal pavement, without Ricci, in a dark sweater, with her bandaging still on his ribs, having said the truest thing she had ever heard him say, and she made the decision the way she made all decisions now. Not from longing, not from patience, not from the hope that a man might eventually see her. From full knowledge. Of him, of herself, of exactly what she was and wasn't willing to carry. I have conditions, she said. Something moved in him. She felt it before she saw it, a release of tension so deep it had been structural, load-bearing, the kind of tension a person doesn't know they've been holding until it goes. Tell me, he said. She told him. She took her time about it. The canal went on its slow, indifferent way beside them while she laid it out. The company stayed hers, operating independently, no Cavallo involvement in its structure or its clients. Her Sundays stayed her own. The dinners and the events she would attend as herself, not as an extension of him, which meant she would speak when she had something to say and wear what she chose and move through his world the way she moved through her own. As someone with a full interior life and opinions and the particular kind of warm, precise social intelligence that had, it turned out, been quietly invaluable to everyone around her for years. If he closed a door on her again, not with distance this time, she would see distance coming, but if he ever again chose not to see her, she would leave. Without drama. Without a final confrontation. She would simply go, because she had proven to herself she could, and that proof did not expire. He listened to all of it. He asked one question, about the company structure, which was both the most Dante response possible and also, she understood, his way of confirming that he was taking the terms seriously rather than performing agreement. She answered it. Then he said, yes. Just that. One word, the way he said things he meant. She looked at him for a long moment on the canal pavement with the October light coming in low and the city going about its Sunday business around them, and she felt, for the first time in years, the thing she had felt in the Brera garden, but different. Not the breathless, total feeling of falling into something without being able to see the bottom. Something more deliberate than that. More costly, more chosen, more real. She held out her hand. He looked at it. Then he took it, and his grip was warm and certain, and they stood on the canal pavement like two people who had negotiated something difficult and come out the other side of it still standing. Come and have coffee with me, she said. Yes, he said again. They walked along the canal, her hand in his, the water beside them catching the morning light and throwing it back in small, in different pieces, and the city did not stop or notice or rearrange itself for their benefit. It simply continued, as cities do, enormous and indifferent and full of lives running their own currents. Bianca Russo walked through it and felt, with a clarity that required no maintenance and asked nothing of the future, entirely like herself. It was, she thought, an excellent place to start.